Well, it might not be news to some, but doctors are facing censorship from the government, especially in states like California. Surprise, surprise. So, what are they allowed to say? And more importantly, how does this impact your health? Joining us today is Dr. Azadeh Katibi, a board certified physician with a master's in public health and a master's in health and medical sciences. Dr. Katibi is also a staunch advocate for medical freedom, having filed multiple lawsuits against California's government for violations of physicians' First Amendment rights. She's testified before Congress on issues like patient autonomy and the physician-patient relationship during the COVID pandemic. In addition to her medical work, Dr. Katibi is an accomplished actor and filmmaker with experience on Academy Award eligible and shortlisted films. Currently, she's working on a documentary exploring free speech in medicine. Dr. Katibi, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate this time, Kim. I'm super excited and hope that whatever I say will serve your audience.
I'm sure it will. You know, I have to tell you, to get ready for this interview, I watched you on Dr. Drew's show,
Yeah.
and it was so funny to watch how you were like, Drew, Dr. Drew, I've watched you forever. I mean, I listened to you all the time when I was young on Loveline. And it's so funny because I used to listen to Loveline all the time. And I'm in my 40s. And now the younger kids, like, do not know who he is. They do not know the show Loveline. Like, they don't know who this guy. And to me, it's just like, wow, we're old if we've hit the point where they don't know who Dr. Drew and Adam Carolla and Loveline.
Yeah. And also, like, now I'm at this stage where I see people on social media at these like red carpet events, like big time, and I don't recognize the celebrity at
Yeah.
all. And I'm just like, I'm
Who is
really
right?
old now.
I don't know the young people at all, but I have to tell you, it was funny because you were telling Dr. Drew, you're like, oh, and he was saying, oh, it's full circle. Here you are. You used to listen to me. Now you're here. And then you said, oh, and we both were on Wheel of Fortune, but 20 years apart. I have to tell you, full circle. So this will come full circle. I actually co-hosted Loveline with Dr. Drew for a week.
What?
Back in my radio
Wow.
days. Yeah. Back when before I switched over into political, like digital online political news, I used to do a syndicated radio talk show.
Yes.
And when I was, and it was about relationships. It was women's topics. It was Loveline, but for women. And it was at night. It was, competed, but it got, was targeting a different audience. But when I was in between syndications, I had left the contract with one of the companies, and before I moved on to iHeart, which ended up being iHeart. Loveline actually was trying to get me to potentially co-host with Dr. Drew, and they invited me in to test me out and sit there and do a week. But ultimately, I didn't want to. I'm a host. I'm not a co-host. It was just So I did launch a second syndication, but with iHeart before I left 3 years after that one, and became a political. Here I am. So full
I
circle.
love it. But I think what was missing on that show was like a strong feminine counter. There's a
Yeah.
lot of masculine energy on that show, which is cool. Like that's how they want to do it. But that would have been awesome because you are that very strong feminine instead of that passive feminine
But I have to tell
energy.
you, the only celebrity crush I've ever had in my entire life is Dr. Drew. I don't know. And for whatever, there's a lot of good looking celebrity guys out there, but Dr. Drew, for whatever reason, and I had the hardest time sitting there in that room with him. I was like, this guy's so cute. And he is in person. He's so much more handsome.
Really?
Yeah. He's a good looking gentleman. And he's the
Yeah,
only celebrity crush
I
I've
had
ever
a
had.
fangirl moment. I had a fangirl moment when I was like, oh my God, I'm talking to this guy. And
Yeah.
yeah, I could totally see that. I actually probably have a little bit of a crush on him too.
And I'm sorry to all the male audience right now watching. Everybody's a man, like most of the audience is male. And they're like, oh, great. These girls are sitting here talking about some other guy. Like,
Yeah.
sorry about that. Gag, I know. Okay. But
Had
I
a
just
crush,
wanted to
had
bring
a
that up.
crush. Not present tense.
Right.
Maybe
No,
past
not,
tense.
no.
Yeah.
Yes. Back then, this was like, when I was doing that, sitting in that, I was like 30. I mean, I was like over 10 years ago. So
Yeah.
that I tried out Loveline. But I just thought that was funny as I was watching that. I was like, oh, full circle again, little, here. And I've
Full
been on that
circle.
show. And so, okay, so let's talk. And he's also here in California, right?
We
And
still are somehow still.
I'm leaving though in 2 weeks. I'm out of here. But so let's talk about what the heck is going on. I've known that there's a lot of censorship. Of course, we've been talking about this since the pandemic. The censorship against people like myself, the media was censored heavily, independent media, where we would say something about, and I remember just reflecting back now in hindsight, saying early on that the COVID vaccine is doing, there's reports that it's having some effect on the heart. We don't know what the effect is, but it's doing something to the heart. That was totally ripped off online. They then slapped a sanction on my show. Basically, they said I got suspended for a week. I wasn't able to do any content. And then, fast forward a couple of months and they're like, oh yeah, it actually does cause myocarditis and pericarditis. Just the censorship was intense against those of us in the media. We saw the Twitter files, we saw all of this. But what was going on with the doctors? What kind of censorship was happening on the physician side? Because all we saw was our doctors all following along like zombies. Like, get the shot, everybody needs the shot. And you're like, okay, but no, get the shot. We can't even see you. You can't even step foot in our office. I mean, I had a legitimate heart concern. And the cardiologist saw me the first time. For the follow-up during the pandemic, would not see me without a vaccine. I mean,
Wow.
Patients were being censored from even seeing physicians, heart doctors. I wasn't able to get into a heart doctor. And it was because, well, if you're not going to get the vaccine, then we can't see you. You can't come into our office. So what was going on there? What the heck happened? And why is this still happening?
So, I think there's a couple of factors that were playing, at least a couple of factors that were playing into it. One was in the beginning, a lot of doctors just didn't even know what was happening, and they're trying to get information from studies, but there's not a lot of studies. They're trying to get information from what's happening overseas. So the media is also affecting that, and they're trying to, there's also like scrambling to see, like, can we see patients safely? Is it good for us? Is it going to be good for our kids if we go see a patient and then what's the latency period of this virus? So we were all scrambling to get information. And then because there was the reactivity in the mainstream media was promoting certain narratives where you were seeing pictures of people dying in Italy, and there was mismanagement of systems in New York. So you were having people die at unnecessary rates, and people were just extrapolating that to mean that was going to be their experience when COVID hit among their patients. It created a lot of like reactivity, and instead of being centered. And so that was one. The news was interfering, the lack of information, the need for security. And what you ended up seeing, and what I started seeing very early on, was even in my physician Facebook groups, there was a lot of like contentious discussion in a rate that I was like worried. I was like, this is not calm centered discussion. Even though you have this emergent thing, you need to have centered discussion instead of like calling people names. There was name calling going out around. There was declarations, you're going to kill us all. Like, I was just like, what is going on that physicians are talking to each other like this? And that's their unbalanced mind. It's the dysregulated mind.
So there's censorship happening still now, though. I mean, there's bills, there's laws. Like, what has happened? What is happening today? I mean, I'm just so floored that this is still happening 5 years later.
Right. So what happened in California is that there was the vaccine working group during COVID, a group of representatives, that some of them were doctors, came together and put out a series of bills. And one of those was a bill that said, AB 2098, that said that any doctor who speaks against COVID consensus can have their license investigated or taken away.
Wow.
And so that really caused a lot of doctors who were already silencing themselves, because we were seeing, like, you were getting deplatformed.
Yeah.
They were worried about being deplatformed in their own life. And now when you have a situation where probably 80%, maybe 85% of doctors are working for corporate entities, right? They're part of a larger behemoth where they have a smaller voice, and they're afraid for their livelihoods, and they have all of this debt, for example. Like, so many doctors are in medical debt from educational debt, right? And they have their families, so they're kind of stuck. And so they would start self-censoring themselves. You saw this soup of big tech colluding with and being pressured by the government to censor people. So it was just this inability to speak. There were some doctors who were speaking out, and to them, they're my heroes forever. I'm going to be grateful because they at least, put their hands on that dam, the hole in the dam. And so and I started speaking out because I was just like, this is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
What I had learned in public health training was that you look at what's going on with the people. You don't mandate medical interventions onto the people. You see what the people want. You have to do it ethically. You don't have this top-down approach. Why aren't we listening to dissenting voices? Why is the government not listening to dissenting medical voices? Which later on, Francis Collins said, well, we didn't have time. I'm like, are you kidding me? You didn't have time? You had time to make a mediocre music video about COVID, but you didn't have time to have like a meeting or a conference with dissenting voices. It's just so dystopian. And what ended up happening is that law that was AB 2098, we ended up fighting it in the courts with New Civil Liberties Alliance, a legal nonprofit. And we ended up getting a preliminary injunction where the judge said this law is nonsense, it's grammatically incorrect, and he allowed the preliminary injunction so the state couldn't take action against us if we decided to give a dissenting voice to whatever this, that was opposing whatever this ill-defined consensus was. And then the government, the California legislature, quietly reappealed the law before we got some final rulings on the law. Because Gavin Newsom went up to my friend and said, hey, that was my idea. It was my idea to repeal it. Should never have passed in the first place.
Wait a minute,
I'm like,
what?
Dude, why did you, Gavin Newsom, sign the bill if it never should have passed in the first place? You know, just trying to make himself look good. And so that law, which was an obvious First Amendment rights violation of doctors, was put to bed. You know, just kind of everybody breathed a sigh of relief.
How long was it a law?
It was a law. I mean, so I think November till we got our preliminary injunction in January. And I think for like about a year, don't quote me on that, or maybe less than a year. But that it still, people were already afraid. Doctors were already afraid. My friends were already afraid. And I think that really sealed the fear in terms of like creating this rigid box in which they couldn't come out anymore. And there's still doctors who don't know that law has been repealed. So there's no sense of freedom that has entered the medical consciousness. It is still pervasive. And
has there ever been,
COVID opened my eyes to that.
Has there ever been another instance where doctors were told you're not allowed to go against the consensus?
So there have been instances, especially in California's history, where doctors and government and private entities have kind of worked within themselves, and doctors, they have been dissenting voices, but private organizations and the government have overpowered those dissenting voices. This happened in the early 1800s and the early 1900s with the eugenics movement in California, where California was the leader in mass sterilizing thousands of people, and it inspired the Holocaust in World War II.
What?
So, and
who were they sterilizing?
People that were deemed not appropriate to procreate. So people who were developmentally delayed, mentally delayed, or just people who maybe were just not deemed like high IQ enough. And it's not something that was like cut and dry.
Wow.
So there was this case and that went to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court justice said 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. This lady should have been sterilized. And the girl by all means was normal. You know, maybe she wasn't the smartest girl, but woman, but it was just travesty in the history of California and the nation. To
think that you could,
by the way, the Supreme Court has never gone back and ruled that we can't force sterilize people. By the way, that law is still on the book.
That's crazy. To think that you could take away your God-given human right of, that's what, you know, if God doesn't want you to create, then you won't, right? I mean, rather than having some judge or state say, well, I'm playing God now and I'm going to say that you're not allowed to procreate. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah, and it was pointed out to me yesterday that the government did the same thing in the 1990s with the opioid that promoted the opioid epidemic. It was the government that came and said, if you do not treat people's pain appropriately, we can go after you criminally and call you a criminal. And that fear in doctors made them want to make everybody's pain a zero, which then led to people being addicted to these opiates. And also doctors wanted to minimize their own risk, so they would refer these people to pain doctors instead of trying to take care of it themselves. So you have destabilization of the medical infrastructure, because you're just sending these patients out instead of taking them themselves. So it's more visits, more addiction, and it just, the government should not be involved in telling doctors how to practice medicine.
That's
Yet
interesting.
again, with this law that I'm fighting, we're seeing it
Yeah.
again.
It's interesting you brought that up, because I think a lot of us were under the impression that the reason why the opioid crisis happened was because doctors were being incentivized by the pharmaceutical companies to continue giving out these pain pills to people. But what you're shedding a different light on this, that also the government was essentially, and probably the corporations, because I'd imagine, you know, and I know from people in my own life who've been addicted to opioids, is that they would say the doctor was bad. My doctor was bad doctor, right? Bad reviews, bad, like, don't ever go to this doctor. And it was because the doctor wouldn't give them the pain pills that they were seeking, because the doctor's like, I think you're addicted and I'm not going to give these to you. And then they're like, well, I'm going to complain about you to your bosses, and I'm going to complain about you online. And that there's that aspect of it. There's the pharmaceutical push, you know, because we're under the impression that doctors are paid, you know, the more you push a pill, the more prescriptions you write, you get incentivized to do this, to prescribe certain drugs. Is that true?
No.
Really?
It's
That's
not
not
true
true?
that you're incentivized. The more prescriptions you write, the more money
Well,
you make.
what the hell
That's
is up
not
with
true.
these like these beautiful pharmaceutical reps that show up, these like blonde chicks that are showing up everywhere, and they're making a fortune, by the way. And they go there and they're
Oh, they
like,
are.
let me like sell you, hey doc, like let me tell you about this new product, Viagra, and then, you know, write up scripts for this. What is your incentive as a doctor? Why are they sending these beautiful women around to try to entice the doctors to write these prescriptions?
So in the early 2000s, when I was in medical school, there started becoming a push against having these pharmaceutical reps entangle themselves within doctors' practices. And there's still, of course, there's that. They bring lunch for some doctors. Now there's a law called the Sunshine, I think it's called the Sunshine Act, where
Mhm.
anything that you accept from a pharmaceutical company, or if you go to a pharma dinner, it goes into a database and it shows which you can look that up for your doctor. How much did they get paid by a certain pharmaceutical company? We are supposed to, when we are giving talks or lectures at continuing medical education conference or any conference, supposed to list our uh, biases and our conflicts, and that you're required to list the pharmaceutical companies that you're consulting for or getting paid by. So there is that element. But the idea that you're getting paid per prescription, that's not really true. However, there is data that shows just even getting a pen with a drug's name on it affects your prescribing uh, patterns. It
Yeah.
affects your subconscious to want to promote this drug. And that's why you have these reps coming in, super nice, super happy. And let me tell you about this drug. But the advice that I got, which is wonderful, is this prescription that you're writing is a permission slip for your patient. Like, this is a legal document, and you have to treat it as it is a legal document. You have to treat it as
Mhm.
such and treat it as something sacred. It's a permission slip that you're giving your patient to take something. So be very careful with that. And also be very careful with what influences you let in terms of these pharma reps coming in and trying to influence you. I
So is
got
it
that guidance, which I think was great, but I don't think everybody gets that guidance.
So is it that they used to just incentivize? How did they incentivize the doctors then? I mean, a pen I don't think is going to do it. I mean, would they give them trips, dinner? You said dinners, like
Pens, lunches, paid wonderful dinners at really great restaurants that are candlelit, and you come and you listen to a talk and about this drug, and then you get to see your colleagues, and this creates this warm atmosphere. Here's a tote bag with the name of
but I mean,
the
were they giving doctors like without them in attendance? Were they giving the doctors like tickets to concerts or tickets to sporting events or vacations to places or cars? I mean, this is kind of what some of us think.
I don't know what happened before my time in the early
Oh,
2000s, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was happening before. Like, I wouldn't be
okay.
surprised if you got tickets to things before. In my time, it got a
Hmm.
lot more strict, which
Yeah.
I think was a good thing. And a lot of that movement was doctors actually doing research to show, hey, when you get, and you said a pen won't do it, but they've shown that even a pen does it.
Hmm.
So, imagine, like, if a pen can do that, what can a dinner do? What can uh, being called a thought leader by a pharmaceutical? Oh, you're a thought leader. We're going to pay you $1,000 so you can be a thought leader and give a lecture. Like, what does that do to what you
Right.
promote and how you act and how you react? So
Okay.
as much as possible, we need to reduce this bias, and
But so
also
so
reduce it by the government too.
yeah, and I think most of us just thought the pharmaceutical companies were somehow influencing the doctors to just write a ton of scripts, and maybe that is to some degree true. But it sounds like the other layer of this is your corporation that you're working for. So hospitals are run by corporations, right? And clinics are probably often run by corporate. There's a lot of doctors within a corporate system, and so perhaps the corporate suits, who are probably not doctors, right, are pressuring because of for like the customer's always right, I guess, which is the patient. And then there's the government influence on top of that, of the government then saying, and if you don't behave the way we want, we're going to rip your license away, right? I mean, are those? Would you say that those two are the more powerful influencers, and which one of those two is the most powerful?
At this point, the most powerful influencer, I believe, is the corporate-like entities for which the majority of doctors in the United States are working for. We don't have that independence anymore, and that is limiting our free speech because we're afraid to say what we need to say because we might get fired, and it changes our behavior patterns, right? Because if your job is based on survey data,
Mm-hmm.
doctors get surveyed by their patients all the time, so they may change their behavior based on wanting to get higher scores so that the administration is happy with them. And there's also admin setting certain protocols and algorithms. When you see this patient, you're going to try this first, then we're going to try this second, then we're going to try this third. And if you differ from that or veer away from that, you're going to be the outlier in the system and they won't be happy with you. So it
Mm.
creates all of this disincentive to actually do what you really believe is right. And so for me, my assessment is that that corporatization of medicine and doctors now working for others is a huge problem.
Right.
That's why you see some doctors starting their own practices or in direct DCPs, where they are setting it up as kind of like a membership. It used to be called kind of a boutique practice. Now it's called DCP, where the patient pays a certain membership a month and then gets great access to the doctor. A lot of your services are taken care of, like basic labs, et cetera. And you have a one-on-one connection with that doctor. They're more available to you, and you have the layers of bureaucracy are also removed.
Hmm.
We need to be creating these new systems. And I hope that what's happened in these past 5 years, I know it is, but to really see that. Unfortunately, the young doctors are so afraid. But we need to kind of encourage this. There are people creating these systems, and we need to support them.
I mean, I don't think you're supposed to like your doctor, really. I mean, if you think about what the doctor should be doing, no one wants to hear, look, you're fat because you need a diet and exercise, right? Like, instead, they'd rather hear, just give me the shot, doc. Like, just give me the shot and make sure it's cheap enough so that I could just get skinny. It's not, hey, look, rather than drug you up with all of these, push pills on you and drugs on you, you need to pay more attention to your health. You're just not making good life decisions. No one really wants to hear that, but that's really what a doctor should be saying, right, to a patient, rather than just, here's more pills to pop. So it sounds to me like what's been the tragic turn of events in our health system has been the corporatization, which of course the corporate has a profit motive. They're profit driven. They don't want you to say just fast and diet and exercise because that doesn't make them any money. What makes them money is you're pushing procedures, like all these different things, right? So they want to see the profit motive is kind of like a sick motive, right? Keeping people sick is profitable in a sick industry. And then the
Right.
second thing being the patients then getting more control over the doctor and saying, you're going to give me these damn pain pills or else I'm going to write a bad review. And so you just keep me addicted to these opioids, keep pushing, doc. So it sounds like that corporate profit motive and that patient push has really forced doctors to not be able to say, look, I'm going to give you a hard dose of real medicine. And that is your lifestyle sucks and you need to change your lifestyle and you're dying and there's nothing I could do to really, there's no real magic pill I can give you, ultimately. So that sounds like that's rather than doctors being able to actually practice medicine.
Yeah, and there's other issues too on top of what you're saying, because the insurance companies have also reduced the amount of time through, or their insurance company incentives of lower payment per patient, have reduced the amount of times, have incentivized doctors to reduce the amount of times they spend with each patient. And so then you have less one-on-one time with that patient. So the doctor can't even get into discussing your lifestyle issues with you. So now you do have the situation where the patient's like, I have this problem, this problem, this problem. The doctor's like, I can only talk about one of them with you. Come back for the other two, which then creates more medical visits. And then the second issue is, I can't really take care of the fact that you're sad. I can't talk to you about the fact that you're not getting sunlight and you don't feel purpose in your life. And maybe your microbiome is off. And what are you eating? But here, take a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, an SSRI, an antidepressant, and come back in 6 weeks and let me know what you feel. Right. So it creates this like just messy system that's just upside down versus if you had that time also to spend with your doctor, you could have a relationship where the doctor could actually breathe enough to be able to sit in front of you and have an attuned conversation. And you said, well, you're not supposed to like your doctor. I agree with you to an extent. I think it's good to have a doctor who's a consultant that you respect and who respects you. And then you can have those difficult conversations where they may be urging you or pushing you to stretch into the areas of discomfort in your own life so that you can grow beyond the things that are confining you, whether it's your diet or how your social interactions with people, or maybe you're not actually pursuing what you're meant to pursue, and that creates this stress inside of you, and then that leads to fatigue or chronic anxiety, right? To actually disentangle these parts of you in an attuned way, that takes time. And so some people say, well, doctors aren't supposed to do that. My argument is actually doctors are supposed to do that. You're not just supposed to like check their blood pressure, et cetera. You're supposed to be able to take care of that whole person and bring them to a state of aligned, thriving health. But for that, you need time. You need time, and you need your own nervous system as a physician to be relaxed so you can have that attuned conversation with them. The system currently, which is promoting burnout, toxicity, the Surgeon General came out with a report on burnout in the medical systems. It's a huge problem. And another problem also is the fact that doctors are being replaced by nurses and physician's assistants. And I myself have seen that, and I think it's great to have these health professionals help and be complementary. But the role of the doctor and the training of a doctor is just, especially a good doctor, is essential. And we're seeing a watering down of that in our systems as well as the corporate-like structures replace them with cheaper people.
So let's, I want to talk more about that a little bit, but I want to go back to what the state is doing, the censorship, because that's also a big component of what is causing doctors to not practice medicine the way they probably should be. So there was this bill that Gavin Newsom, of all people, Gavin Newsom comes, sauntering in and says, oh, I've now, even though, yes, I signed this and it's been law, I now need to look better because I'm going to eventually run for president. And so I've got to repeal this if I want to actually appeal to the American people, right? So, which, hey, glad you did it. I don't care. And I don't care what your motive was. I mean, it matters when you try to run for president, but I don't really, whatever, as long as it was done. What are some of the other bills or laws that California has that has been silencing doctors?
So there was the AB 2098 law that we fought that got repealed. Yeah. And now we have a new law, AB 241, that was actually passed and signed by Gavin Newsom in 2019. It took a couple years for them to actually implement the law, but this preceded the COVID times, but it was still a gross First Amendment rights violation. And what that law says, and we're fighting it right now, it's on appeal, and the great legal nonprofit Pacific Legal Foundation is providing the counsel for us to fight this law. It's a law that says that any doctor who teaches, or organization who teaches continuing medical education, or CME, in the state of California, at every single CME they teach, and that could be, it's very poorly defined. So is that if I come in for a 15-minute lecture as part of a larger conference, do I have to do this too? We don't know. But they're required to show examples of how implicit bias affects perceptions and treatment decisions of physicians and surgeons, leading to disparities in health outcomes, and or strategies to address how unintended biases in decision-making may contribute to health disparities by shaping behavior and producing differences in medical treatment along lines of race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, socioeconomic status, or other characteristics. So they're trying to address implicit bias and how doctors may treat different people based on different demographics, specifically, and mostly it's focused on race and gender, and but other things as well. The problem is there's multiple problems. First of all, the government should not be mandating the speech of doctors. That's a First Amendment rights violation. Oh. Second of all, implicit bias is very controversial in medicine itself. And there's some evidence that these implicit bias trainings, because that's what this is, CME, they want to put implicit bias training in every single CME that you teach. There's evidence that actually teaching it may backfire. So the science is not even there yet to show how we should teach it to different people based on their own individual background in neuropsychology. You may need to teach it differently to different people so you don't get a certain segment having backlash and getting the opposite results of what you want in doing these trainings for them. The people who defined implicit bias, the 3 psychologists that created the implicit association test, have disagreement between themselves on what implicit bias actually means. Is it a research tool, or, as the one who's become the most famous and academically successful says, it's the roots of prejudice, right? So even if the original psychologists, because the original psychologists are not even agreeing between themselves, how can we have a law that's saying you have to teach this right now in order to prevent deaths?
Yeah.
So the case that we're fighting, it's called Katibi versus Hawkins, and we fought it in the lower courts, federal court, and the lower court one judge came back and said, no, it's perfectly fine to force doctors to say what the government wants them to say during CME, because CME is state speech. The government is saying that doctors are government speakers when they're teaching other doctors, even though the CME system was created by doctors for doctors in association with private organizations. The government has now hijacked this and is saying, when you say CME, you're engaging in government speech. It's just completely upside down, and it has terrible, terrible consequences and implications if the appellate court upholds this, because it means that not just doctors, the precedent will be set for all licensed professionals, psychologists, therapists, contractors. All licensed professionals may now, when they go to educational courses, have to say whatever the state puts into the law for them to have to say. It's just upside down. Why should the state be telling you what your discipline is?
So this is like opposite of censorship. This is forcing you to say something.
Yeah, but it kind of is also, when you're teaching one thing, you don't have enough time to hear the other stuff. So you're actually preventing the listener and the listener's First Amendment rights from hearing what the person truly would say. I mean, continuing medical education time is something that is precious, right? If you have a 15-minute lecture to give as part of a larger conference with multiple speakers, like, you're going to say as much as you can in that 15 minutes. So we don't even know how much you're supposed to say about implicit bias. Can you say you disagree with it? In court, the court's lawyer said, well, you can disagree with it, but it was just very vaguely defined how much you could disagree with it. So am I supposed to go, and when I'm teaching continuing medical education, say, I disagree with this law, I disagree with implicit bias and how it's being taught, but I'm going to have to say it anyway? Like, can the government come after you for saying that? The amorphous nature of it, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with COVID, when you don't know what you're allowed to say to get deplatformed, when Kim Iverson doesn't know, can I say this, or will YouTube just take this off? Then you start self-censoring yourself. And so then you start using code words. And that in itself is dangerous, because you're actually now, as a result, changing the consciousness of the listener, and thus changing the consciousness of society in a different way than if you were truly able to say what you really believe. So you're changing the trajectory of society, especially because the younger generations are only going to hear those code words instead of really truly hearing what you really believe. And so you change the trajectory of society. It's very, very frightening. And it's what Hannah Arendt argued is the roots of totalitarian society.
I'm surprised that it is that, how can the government, it just seems so odd that the government would be allowed to force people to say the same message over and over and over again. And that the judges, like at the lower court, would say, well, it's government speech. Well, there's got to be protection against the indoctrination of government speech, especially when you're forcing everybody. I mean, it's one thing to like run a commercial, I guess. The government wants to run a commercial and indoctrinate people, but it's another thing to force an individual to say what the government wants them to say. I mean, the government could do that with anything then. It seems like any message the government just deems government messaging, then the government could force every single person of authority and a person that people trust into saying this particular thing that is not true, for example. Like, I mean, going around and telling all the doctors, you must tell everybody, you know, when you're in these seminars, you must say the COVID vaccine stops the spread. And if you get the jab, you won't get COVID, you won't get sick, you won't be hospitalized, which we all know is not true. But it seems like they would be able to force people in positions of authority. And that's the thing that's so scary about this, because this isn't just running a commercial and we all know, yeah, that's government propaganda. When you can get experts to force experts to say something, then that is extremely dangerous, because people do not know unless, and there seems that there would at least at minimum have to be a disclaimer where the person says, look, this is now, I'm going to switch now into the government talking points. This is from the government and it's required of me to say this thing. But that sounds very China. You know, that just...
It is very China.
Right.
It is very China. I mean, in China, maybe we wouldn't even be able to say I disagree with the government, but it is. It's crazy. We have a First Amendment so that we don't have these situations. We have a First Amendment so the government can't put words in the mouth of private citizens.
Yeah.
That is exactly what is happening with this law. And it's going to affect all licensed professionals. And it's going to create the situation where in the future, the government can say, well, we want you at every CME to say that vaccines are safe and effective, or that abortion is healthcare. And then in Florida, the government in that state can or another state, whatever state, can make a law that says in the state of whatever that you're licensed in, you have to say that abortion is unethical and wrong. So now what happens? You have these two opposing doctors who have to teach opposing things in different states. And then what if a doctor is licensed in both states and then they come to a national conference and they say one thing that they like? It just is a setup for people getting investigated, a setup for them losing their license. It's a setup for the law being weaponized to go after doctors that the government that doesn't like or that don't follow the mainstream narrative. It's a setup for doctors to further chill their speech. Because what if you have a doctor in a private institution like a university who teaches CME as part of their job? Now they have to teach this. What if they disagree? Will they and they refuse to do it? Will they get reported by the residents or the fellows and then get investigated and lose their license? Will the trainees be reporting their attending? Will the person who disagrees at Stanford, who doesn't want to teach implicit bias at every CME they teach in the hospital, get fired from Stanford? Will pharma companies, because we talked about pharma earlier, Kim, like will pharma companies now who give money, right? Pharma companies give money to organizations to create CME. So now if CME is government speech, pharma companies are giving money to government speakers to say government speech. So, I mean, it's just the lack of thinking of the judges in the lower court was just, it's mind-boggling. Of the judge in the lower court was just mind-boggling to me, because now it's a situation where a corporation is funneling money to a state speaker to say what the corporation, it just doesn't make sense. And
because the corporations are able to influence the government and in a variety of different ways. And then the government says, all right, then we'll just mandate. I mean, that's what we saw with like the vaccination campaign, right? It was these private entities that had a bunch of money that they could make. So they lobby the government to mandate it. And then the government says, all right, we'll mandate it because it's the motive behind it is the pharmaceutical industry. And because they're funding all the campaigns for the politicians, it ultimately ends up awful for the people.
It ultimately ends up awful for the people. And history has shown us this time and time and time again. When will we learn from history? We should, I mean, and the Bill of Rights is there for a reason. We need to keep doctor speech considered private speech.
Yeah.
It's simple as that. Simple as that.
So this, now it's gone. So the federal judge, so now you're appealing it.
Yeah. So we heard it in front of a three judge panel in court last week.
Okay.
And I was very nervous because what they kept saying things like, well, If the doctor doesn't want to teach CME, they can just teach non-CME courses and say what they want to say. So they absolutely disregarded the fact that CME is set up as a private entity. They were just kind of blurring the lines behind it and making it sound like this was a governmental setup. And it's not. It's a private organizational system of private citizens coming together and private organizations creating medical education. The government just said, hey, you have to take a certain X amount of hours of this CME in order for you to maintain licensure. And there was actually doctors who've created CME. They made it for doctors. They made it for the profession of medicine. Licensure was actually something that doctors pushed for in the States. And so this was all doctor-led. And so the government shouldn't, just by looking at the history of these legislations of licensure and medical education requirements, et cetera, should respect the fact that this was a privately created force that then put it into law. But it doesn't make CME government speech. So I really hope, and I really hope that the appellate court starts realizing this, that this is private speech, that it's not government speech. That's all that's before the court in the appellate level. And I hope they make the right decision. I also really hope that your listeners can go and put pressure on their representatives in the California legislature to repeal this law. Pressure on Rob Bonta to just stand down, pressure on Gavin Newsom to promote the repeal of this law, AB 241, to stop the insanity and the dystopia that's impending.
Yeah, I hope so too. We will put, are there links that you want us to, where do you want people to go?
Well, you can follow me along on my Twitter, Azadeh Katibi MD. For updates on the law. And I'm also on Instagram at Azadeh Katibi MD/MS/MPH. I have a Substack, Azadeh Katibi MD/MS/MPH, where you can get links and some action items. And you can follow me on my podcast Within with Dr. Azadeh Katibi MD/MS/MPH. It's on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, and your podcast platforms. Right. I'll be updating you guys, hopefully talking to some players in this and keeping the fires going for freedom.
Yeah. Well, I do have the links down below for your Substack, your X, and also your podcast, so people can definitely follow along on all of those. I wish you the best of luck on this. I mean, it's really apparent. Our medical system, I mean, but this what you're talking about, this government speech thing and forcing experts to say certain things in certain circumstances, that will just cross over to a variety of different industries. Other big industries, profit motive industries will see that and say, oh, we could do that in same similar form over here for like whatever, financial or real estate or whatever. So it's very, very scary that we're losing. What I'm gathering from this whole conversation, even just talking about the corporatization of our medical system. You know, people always scream and bitch and moan about the insurance aspect, which is a big problem, but because that's also a corporate profit motive issue. But there just is also a corporatization of the actual medical facilities that you show up to that is also highly problematic for the individual patient when everything comes down to dollar signs. And that is ultimately what I'm gathering from this entire conversation, that everything's just coming down to dollar signs. I mean, you've got private industries, private profit motive that is controlling every aspect of everything in our medical. Even these laws to censor doctors or force doctors into certain speech is fundamentally motivated by a private profit motive that goes in there and pressures the politicians to, hey, mandate this or make this happen or do this for us because this is good for our industry, this is good for our business, and screw the people, whether or not, you know. And we saw that during COVID for sure, and it opened up a lot of eyes. But it sounds like that same profit motive is ruining every aspect, from the pharmaceutical industry to the medical industry to the censorship to you know, the politician, everything. It just seems like every single aspect boils down to how can these private industries make the most amount of money and ensure that there's no pushback or other narratives are given, so you know, no alternatives. So that way everybody's just forced into this one way that's going to just make a ton of money for big industries.
Kim, you just said something that's also really, really powerful. That's that's something important for your listeners. I'm going to say it again in a different way because I think it's so important what you said. You're saying that under this law, private corporations, now that the president, if hopefully the appellate court will overturn it, but if they uphold this law, private corporations can then use their lobbying money to then lobby representatives in the legislature to require certain things be taught in any continuing education for any licensed professional to actually serve the purposes of the corporate interests that are lobbying, as opposed to the people within the industry teaching what they believe is the honest teaching that's as close to truth as they can get it. And so you're going to have this corporate interest, not just the state interests, which I've been talking about, but the corporate interest lobbying to change laws to require licensed professionals to be taught certain things. That is frightening. And I agree with you. That's one, I love capitalism, but one of the things I don't love about it
Right.
is that it can provoke, there's not a consciousness about it, and society really coming together and saying that's bad or that's wrong, it's that it can lead us into really frightening areas where there's no morality. It's an amoral enterprise where the bottom line is how much money you get. And that's one of the things I'm always grappling with. Love capitalism, but this is one part of it that there's a darkness to it. That's the
Yeah.
the shadow side of it. That's the shadow side of it.
It has to be managed. We need ethical capitalism. I'm with you. I'm a capitalist.
Yeah.
I like capitalism. I don't like the alternative systems that are out there. I think capitalism has been better overall for people, but it has to be understood that even the best, like I love candy and cake too, but if I eat too much of it, right, it's not good. But I don't want to be deprived and told I can never have cake or candy, like in a communist type situation.
Right.
I want to be able to thrive and enjoy, but it does have to be in moderation. And that's what has to happen with capitalism is we have to understand the weakness of the system. And the weakness is that the powerful industries, those with a lot of money, can have a disproportionate influence that then creates it to where the rest of us don't get the capitalism. Actually, we don't get the free markets, and because the one big player is like saying, no, I'm going to manipulate it and make sure that it's all just rigged for me to win. Nobody wants to watch a rigged sports game. And capitalism is like sports, but you've got to have refs. You have to have rules, and those rules keep everybody in line to ensure that it's fair play. And that's what we need. And what we've seen many times over, and especially the light has been shining since COVID, is that and we're seeing this in a lot of different varieties of manifestations throughout the government. But yeah, the government isn't doing their job. They're just doing the job of the big money interests. And so you can't trust the politicians at all. And they don't care. I mean, to think for a second the politicians care about what the doctors are teaching, give me a break. They don't care. You think that the guy that just like won his election cares? He doesn't care. He's being told by the lobby to care. And he's being funded by the lobby to care. That's it.
Yeah, I think there is I agree with you in general. Sidney Kamlager-Dove, who wrote this AB 241, working with some organizations that were really caring about trying to bring more equitable treatment of people. I followed her and what she stands for. I really truly believe she believes in this. She really believes that if we teach implicit bias to doctors, we will reduce deaths. I just think she's trying to do it through control and through unconstitutional means. I personally think implicit bias and learning about implicit bias, it changed my outlook. It did affect my consciousness. Do I need to be taught it every single CME? Do I need to have that mandated to me through my speech or other doctor's speech? No. So it's about like, okay, you want these ends, and there may be some, good feeling in the legislators who are trying to make that this certain law at least. But you have to look at the means through which you did it. Do the ends justify the means? No. And another thing that to me was fascinating, just you talking about money, was when I found out, so we have our First Amendment, and the courts in the United States have ruled that people using money are practicing or using their First Amendment right, that money is actually speech. Like, to me, I was just like, that doesn't make sense. Like, because that sets it up for the person who has more money to have a louder voice.
Yeah.
And that is problematic to me in the way the judges and the courts have ruled that money is speech. That to me, I think, makes the system much more towards our corporate interests having too much influence in our capitalistic systems.
Yeah. Well, that's because our capitalistic system, even within the judiciary, which doesn't get enough scrutiny, is set up to protect businesses more than anything. Everything that we think, like from the military to the police to everything that's set up is actually meant fundamentally, like even just the origination of why it was set up was to protect merchants, to protect industry, to protect business. And the judges, the judicial system, one thing the Supreme Court, if you pay attention to the rulings, and no one pays attention to the business rulings from the Supreme Court, but they're unanimous, left and right. They don't care. They protect businesses. And that's,
Wow.
they disagree on the things that fire us all up, the social issues. It's always getting us squabbling about that. But in reality, they're all in with the big businesses. And so they said, well, businesses want to spend all their money and call it speech, then so be it. That's what we'll do. We'll call it speech. It's crazy. It's totally crazy.
So
but-
why do you have any insight on why the Supreme Court, for example, would be incentivized that way to do that? I mean, is it really an idealism principled way of being? Or, I mean, I know some people have talked about certain justices getting trips, et cetera. We talked about pharma and even how a pen
Right.
can affect you. I mean, what are your thoughts?
The only thing that I haven't dug into it enough, but I could tell you on the non-Supreme Court level, when you go into the federal courts or the appellate courts, the state courts, when there's terms on these judges, a lot of them are looking for their next step. What are they going to do after their judgeship? And they end up going and working on the boards of big companies. So they want to be friendly to the big companies. It's no different than Congress people and the revolving door of Congress. And there's just really no attention paid to it. But if you do pay attention to the judges and what they do after their judgeship, a lot of them do not go back to being lawyers. They go and they work for big boards of big companies. On the Supreme Court level, what I think the factor that has been the most is the left liberals who are more traditionally, right? I mean, everything's gone upside down these days, but traditionally liberals had been the ones that were more socialist minded or like anti big business and more for the people. And you had the Republican side, which was heavily for the businesses. And what happened was the Republican side has undoubtedly spent more time ensuring their judges get picked. That has been a focus. It's been a very smart strategy for them because they understood, unlike liberals, Democrats, the left, the right understood judges matter. And they spent a lot of time grooming judges, a lot of time helping judges rise up through the ranks, and a lot of times putting judges in front and center to ensure that they get the positions that they get appointed. So many of the judges have come through a certain way of thinking from certain societies and certain groups that have made them just extremely pro-business. And it's been a fantastic strategy. I mean, you got to hand it to the right. And I'm not right or left. I'm very independent. But the right, that was a really fantastic strategy on their part. It worked. And so, but the problem is, and we're seeing the ramifications of it. And I think even people on the right are starting to say, oh, wait a minute. I don't know if I really like this. Hold on a minute. When it came to COVID, right? And it came to the mandates and it came to, and the problem with all of the court cases that have come up with regarding the mandates, the biggest beef that I've had with all of these court cases is that judges will have thrown out maybe some of the mandates, but it was never on the merits. It was always because the judge would say something like, it wasn't on the merit of like, because this is against a person's right, our freedom, or whatever it is, right? The actual freedom or the rights of the person. That was never taken into consideration when they were throwing out these rulings. They would just say, well, the reason I'm throwing out this mandate is because it was just arbitrary and capricious. You just didn't make everybody do it. Gavin Newsom, you allowed celebrities a pass, but you made everybody else do it. And so because it was arbitrary and capricious, we're throwing out the whole mandate. It wasn't on the merits of this is harming the people. It was always like, well, you used the wrong, or like the OSHA one, the Joe Biden OSHA one. They said, well, we're throwing that out because you use the wrong agency. OSHA doesn't have the power to do this. And it's like, oh, so now you're just setting us up for the next pandemic. You've paved the way. You've pointed them in the right direction now where they know they can't use OSHA, but they will use something else next time because you're not saying fundamentally you can't do this to people. You're just saying OSHA can't do this to people. So there's even the recent rulings that the people on the right have championed. There's been a lot of negative rulings where the judge will not rule in favor of the people and against the mandates. And it's because of that, for one, the politicians being put in power and the judges were pro-business, and that means that they're not wanting to piss off the pharmaceutical companies. They're not wanting to piss off the big money interests, and that is backfiring on the people. So, that's why I'm a big believer in balance. I'm not left or right. I believe in balance. I think both sides bring good things to the table, and at times, one side or the other becomes more tyrannical than the other, and we have to kind of call it out and balance it out. But the balance is the yin and the yang. The balance is there. It is good when we have it. But right now we do have a bit of a lopsided judicial system. But we also have a lopsided, in the other direction, other aspects that have to, like the bureaucracy is heavily on the left, right? And the judicial is heavily on the right. And it all just needs to be balanced out.
Wow, this was really, thank you so much for that insight. I really appreciate it. I don't know how we're going to get to balancing all of that out, but we can.
Well, but it should caution you on the ruling that you may or may not get, from this appellate court. I mean, they're in for the big businesses, so it's a tough battle for anybody in your situation to try to push forward and get a win. We've had a lot of losses when it comes to the free speech crusade. It's a lot of losses with the judges. It's been terrible.
Well, all I can do is try to be hopeful. There's this Persian saying, within hopelessness, there is hope. At the end of a dark night comes a brilliant white dawn. And that's what I focus on. All you can do, and this is something that I want your viewers to take away, is your circle of control. Back in the beginning of COVID, I was like very low energy because I wasn't speaking. I was seeing things that were happening and there was a hesitancy. So I worked on myself. And as I worked on myself, then my circle of control got bigger. And then I started speaking out and worked on that. And then as I started speaking out, more people took notice. And so as you work in your circle of control, it will get bigger over time. And so what I'm doing, and I really appreciate your time, is just talking about it, AB 241, and getting the word out. And then we'll see what happens. I'm really hopeful and confident that something good will happen in this case. And hopefully the judges will see that CME is not government speech, or the representatives will decide to repeal this law. And that's all I can do. And I really hope that your viewers take the time to write their representatives, write Gavin Newsom, and go forward in that respect. And take steps forward.
Let's hope, for sure. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Katibi. It's really been a pleasure learning about this, and shocking. And, I shouldn't say it's been a pleasure talking to you. It hasn't been a pleasure finding out about about these terrible dystopian laws that are being pushed on us. So that's frightening. But
at least now we've created our community too. This dyad, we had this interaction, and we can grow our community. And that's something also very powerful as well, to get support from each other. It's a powerful thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I do have the links down below. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for your time and creating this space for us to talk about this. Have a beautiful day, Kim. Thank you.
Thanks for watching this clip from the full Kim Iversen Show. You can check out the full show every Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. Just head to KimIversonShow.com. It's a full hour-long live stream. See you guys there.